Plastic evaluation is our core expertise at Gradical. We help medical technology companies choose the right plastic for their application with the technical suitability, regulatory compliance, and improved sustainability. Learn more under www.gradical.ch/plastic-evaluation. Our guest today is Dr. Stefan Rössler. Stefan is an expert for the mass balance approach and an auditor for mass balance certifications at TÜV SÜD. After his PhD in chemical engineering, he worked a couple of years in industry as a business and technical consultant. He then later joined TÜV SÜD as an auditor and global product manager for ISCC certifications. Here is our discussion. Hi Stefan, you are an expert for mass balance approach. How does mass balancing work and how does it help to make the chemical industry more sustainable?
Hi Lucas, first of all, thanks for having me in your podcast. Very glad that you give us this opportunity to talk about this very interesting topic, which I have been working in for quite a while now, a little over 4 years, doing a lot of mass balance certifications myself. And it is really my inner pleasure to talk about this topic and give a little bit more insights on it. How does the whole system work? So what is mass balance systems? There are different approaches when it comes to supply chain management, and some of the terminologies are fairly well known. For example, the book and claim approach. Everyone who has been in green energy and has heard about sustainable electricity and those topics, they know about the mass balance approach. And the mass balancing works quite similar to book and claim, where for book and claim it is possible to market the physical material and the sustainable attributes come in with the material in different markets and have different off-takers. For the mass balance approach, it is a little bit more strict. So you have your supply chain in which you have any sort of sustainable green material that is forwarded. And what is really important is that the sustainable attribute of the material always follows the physical flow of the products. So you might have at the very beginning an alternative material source. Alternative means other than fossil. So there are a lot of replacements out there that can be utilized, a lot of carbon sources that can be utilized in order to replace fossil carbon sources that are usually taken from crude oil, natural gas, coal, or other means. And in these supply chains, there are now other materials, like I said, biogenic or waste materials introduced and forwarded in the supply chain, processed. There are alternative intermediates that are generated. And in this supply chain, it is very important that at the end, the customer who buys the final product has some sort of link to the replaced feedstock at the very beginning. And other than for, like I already mentioned, book and claim approach with electricity, where it is sheer impossible to trace like the single electrons from the windmill to the energy consuming apparatus. For, let's say, more physical materials, carbon-based products, intermediates, all the way in the supply chain, this is fairly easier to trace. And therefore, for mass balance approach, really, you always have physical material transported through the supply chain, the sustainable attributes going with the physical material. And the nice thing, and that's where this differs from the let's say, again, one step more strict supply chain management approach, the so-called segregation. For segregation, you have to physically separate the sustainable and non-sustainable materials in the supply chain completely. With mass balance approach, as the name already implies, it is just on a bookkeeping level relevant that the materials can be separated and can be traced. In processing and logistics, the whole supply chain, you're pretty much able to physically mix the material, the sustainable, the regular fossil-based ones, and this, of course, creates a lot of, let's say, synergies for already existing logistics and processes in companies. So you don't have to go, let's say, the extra mile, the extra effort to physically separate the materials, but you can just simply use it, integrate it in your already existing processes, in your already existing supply chains, and use it as a more sustainable route. Again, sustainable by replacing fossil carbon sources for pretty much every product that holds carbon.
Okay. So let me just quickly summarize, because that was a whole lot. So in general, you would have three options for chain of custody. Number one would be book and claim. Number two is the mass balance approach. And the strictest one would be physical segregation. And the book and claim would be, for example, I take an example so people get it more easily. You make biofuel in Brazil. You use the biofuel in Brazil as a, let's say, gas replacement and drive with your car. But the person there at the gas station doesn't pay the premium for the sustainable product, but you sell the, let's say, bio premium to an airline in Europe, and they use it to compensate their flights. So the physical flow of product and the CO2 certification are completely separated. This is book and claim. And then you have mass balance. So, for example, I take biofuel or bioethylene and put it in the same reactor as, for example, also fossil feedstocks, and produce a polymer that can contain, or that can contain to a certain percentage bio feedstock. However, you're not guaranteed how much it is. It is all done by bookkeeping, and you process it in the same plant, and it is physically possible that you have C14 carbon in there. So it is possible that some of your material is actually bio-based. And with physical segregation, you would have a whole separate plant that processes the bio feedstock versus the fossil feedstock. So you exactly know how much biomaterial is in there. And what I always tell people is the advantage of the mass balance is that I do not have to build a new plant, because otherwise I would have to spend billions, build a plant. Maybe I do not have the demand, or also I do not have the bio feedstocks, let's say, volume that I would need to scale this. And therefore, it is a very convenient method for the chemical industry to incorporate more and more over time, more and more bio, or in general, sustainable alternatives into their supply chains. Is that a good summarization? Although that was quite long too.
Lucas, now you're absolutely right. Maybe just one addition. So if you are able to get to go segregated to a certain extent, you don't have to build a completely separate plant, but it is like changing raw materials in your plant. So you need to clean everything. You need to ramp up again. You have maybe, as you said, very small batches at the beginning. And then you have to shut down again, clean everything again, and then run your regular product. And this every time you make a change of product, which of course holds a high downtime. And especially in polymer industry, you have the issue that the producing companies, the polymer producing companies that run the crackers, usually the feedstock is fed into a cracker, and then a polymerization unit produces from, let's say, polyolefins for polyolefins, the ethylene and propylene, and cracker really only works efficiently in large scales. And no one would build a cracker or would even think about running a cracker just for this small scale alternative feedstocks. So again, you need to shut down, you need to ramp up. And for those of your listeners that are familiar with the refinery process, they know what a huge effort it is to have a shutdown and then a ramp up. So it is not just flicking a switch. So absolutely, it is just nowadays. As we're really talking about, let's say, lower volumes, it is just not feasible to make the segregated approach. Even though, with, as you mentioned, segregated approach, at the end, you have a product, you hold a product in your hand, and you can say, well, this really contains alternative carbon sources, biogenic material sources, even though it doesn't look like it. But that's a whole different topic. Whereas for the mass balance, as you mentioned, it might contain it, but even if, like, the piece of product you're holding in your hand does not hold the alternative carbon or the newer bio or waste carbon in it, you can be certain that someone else maybe has it. Again, it is not physically separated.
Yeah, but I think what approach really helps is like ramping up alternative sources gradually. Because in an ideal world, you just would switch and you just run one plant 100% with bio-based feedstocks. However, the problem is availability. How much of these feedstocks can you get? Then there's also economy. These feedstocks currently cost more because of their smaller scale. And therefore, it's also that a certain percentage of customers is willing to pay more for sustainable feedstocks, but some are still very, very price driven. Therefore, it's not just feasible to do this like 0 to 1 approach, like flip a switch and then just change over it completely. But the mass balance allows you to gradually improve and gradually use more and more sustainable feedstocks. And maybe like in 30, 40 years, we will be there and the availability is there so that you can just purely run on sustainable. And I think there's the great strength.
Yeah, totally agree.
Okay, so just are there like advantages and disadvantages for the mass balance approach? So one disadvantage I want to mention just beforehand, this is why I have you on. It's a very like you have to explain the concept before people get it, and you'll have to at least explain it twice until like the whole company gets it usually, or like 3 times. Credical is the plastic expert in medical technology and supports you in the areas of sustainable plastics and material compliance. Our course, Sustainable Plastics and Medical Technology, will bring your development team up to date with the latest developments in sustainable plastics. In addition, we offer the course Regulatory Aspects of Plastic Selection at the CATS and the SCATZ, which provides guidance through the maze of regulations when selecting materials. More under www.credical.ch.
Yeah, so let's say starting with maybe disadvantages, and this really always depends on the company. But in order for a mass balance system to work and to transparently work, there is some sort of third-party proof necessary. Meaning, as like the systems we will be talking about in a bit, there is a certification necessary. There might be also verification approaches. Supply chains can do the whole mass balance supply chain on a self-declaration basis. This has been done for quite a while now, but the times of self-declaration, they are almost over, let's say. And if you want to engage in those more sustainable, more green supply chains, you need to be confident that there is someone in an audit looking over your shoulder. And this is in your business transactions. And this might be the case like for once a year you have your public accountant that checks your books. Yes, but here you also have now a third party company looking at really individual transactions of materials, looking at process efficiency and so on. And from a lot of our clients, this is what we get. We get the feedback is something you need to get accustomed to. But besides that, there, in my opinion, there really is no disadvantage. Coming to the pros using the system, as you mentioned, there are a lot of synergies with your already existing processes. You don't have to build up separate logistics, separate production processes, different sales processes, marketing, this, all of those sections that might be touched when working with these mass balance materials, but they're, let's say, just slightly concerned about those topics. It is a way to participate in the production of greener products, greener intermediates, without really the downsides that you might have when you switch completely, as you said, or need to create parallel production streams, parallel logistic streams, and the materials are pretty similar or equal to the ones you have. So, in my opinion, besides the necessity that you have to explain the system, which is a little unusual to the let's say daily business practice, I really do not see that huge of a disadvantage.
Okay. I want to add two things or make a comment. So you said you will want someone looking over the shoulder of yourself. I would add to that, you would want someone looking over the shoulder of your supplier, because you'll want that the system audits the whole supply chain and makes sure that none of my suppliers are cheating or greenwashing their product. That is basically what this third-party certification is really, really strong, and why you would really want such a system in place. Then the second thing you mentioned, it doesn't impact your product and your production processes this much. You do not know how much of an advantage this is in medical technology. So I'm coming from the plastics in medical device or in medical technology perspective. You produce a plastic with a different feedstock, but chemically it's exactly the same. If you want to elaborate on that and why it is chemically the same as a PhD in chemical engineering, you might elaborate on that later. But you do not need to verify and validate your products, which means you do not lose the approval on the market, meaning that you can introduce an alternative feedstock with a velocity or with the speed that you could not do with an alternative source, because an alternative source, let's say, physically segregated completely different material. I do paper instead of plastic, because I mean, I do not think that paper is always more sustainable than plastic, sometimes even contrary, but not let's not diverge. But let's use it as an example, because it has completely different physical properties, physical and chemical. You need to validate the process. You need to verify that your product works. Then you need to do biocompatibility, and sometimes you even need to do clinical tests, which takes a lot of time and effort. But if you have the same polypropylene from the same supplier in ISCC-PLUS bio-based, certified under a mass balance, you just don't change anything. Your machine runs with the same parameters, and you have basically physically, chemically the same product, which doesn't need a new approval, doesn't need new biocompatibility tests. And this is a huge advantage for medical technology. So you want to elaborate, or you can elaborate on why it is the same and why this yields the same product?
Yes, absolutely. So maybe first of all, we want to talk feedstocks. What are possible feedstocks that might end up in a product? So more or less, there are three different sources of two, let's say, categories that are utilized. The first source is biogenic. Biogenic sources, either from agricultural or from forestry. There are, let's say, grown crops. Good example is starch-based polymers, for example. This comes from potatoes, from corn, all those things. They are processed. You get your starch, and you process this into a starch polymer, or use it as a copolymer in let's say regular polyolefins or any other sort of product. You can compound it, and at the end you have a product. But with those bio-based ones, you might end up with different product specification, material specification. So that's what you do not want.
Mhm.
But let's imagine a different route. Let's not go with corn and starch, but let's go, for example, with any sort of oil product, vegetable oil product that I can get from, let's say, raps or other oily biomass. And I can use this oil, high energy content oil, and I just co-feed it into the regular refinery process. I can do pretty much the same if I do not want to go for a bio-based material that is, let's say, you have the controversy of plate versus plastic, or plate versus fuel, and you want to use a waste oil. Very commonly used feedstock is UCO, used cooking oil. So material that has been used in restaurants or any other places to fry something. And this is processed and also introduced in the same refinery processes that the crude oil goes into. And this usually goes into first a cracker. So after it has been cleaned, it goes into a cracking unit. And here, really, the hydrocarbon chains are just shredded into very small pieces, and preferably, of course, for the polymer industry, into ethylene and propylene. Meaning, at the end, this material, the carbon in the material might come from a biogenic source or from a waste source, but it is shredded down to pieces. You end up with your monomer, and from here you just follow the regular polymerization and polymer producing and processing supply chain. So this has really been cut down to the, let's say, smallest molecular pieces. And at the end, even though this might come from a used cooking oil, the product has no relation to this feedstock anymore. Alternatively, there are other, let's say, waste sources that can be utilized. Another very commonly used feedstock is end of life tires. So old tires that are just shredded. It is rubber, some natural rubber, some synthetic rubber, and those portions of the tire, they are shredded. Then there is usually a pyrolysis process involved, creating a pyrolysis oil, which is then again just introduced into the refinery process, shredded down. You have your monomers, you build up your polymer, any grade of polymer pretty much that the producer has been producing so far can be produced with these monomers again. And that's the reason why at the end you end up with a plastic source, a plastic granulate you use for your everyday processing, your everyday medical products, that has nothing to do with the raw material it used to come from.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not comparable to, let's say, your green, your sustainable, mechanical recycled pens you get as a giveaway at fairs or anything, where you can really see that this is an heterogenic material. It feels different. It looks different. It has, let's say, pigments in it. So here you can really see different materials, different properties, not what you want, especially not if you looking for equal technical property specifications for your product. And as you elaborated, and here you're the experts, we have done certifications, ISCC-PLUS certifications in medical and laboratory. So we have the experience and we have seen which trouble there can be if the people do not understand that this material does not differ to the one that they have always been sourcing. And here again, we are with advantages of mass balance certification.
Yeah. So I quickly summarize. So you have the bio-based feedstocks, which are usually coming from cash crops, corn, starch-based materials such as, or products, crops such as potatoes, or sugarcane is also very, very viable. Then you have sugars, and you can do everything with sugar that you want to do. Either ferment it into lactic acid, do PLA, polylactic acid, or you can break it down to alcohol, hydrolyze it, then you have ethylene, and you can use that to produce polyethylene. Or you use biocircular feedstock, the second category, which is everything that is not competing with food, basically a byproduct. You could also mention tall oil from the paper wood industry, used cooking oil you mentioned. And this has a better, let's say, impact on the environment because you do not use all the land, all the water, all the fertilizer just because of making plastic from it. And then you have the third category, which is chemically recycled feedstocks. And in general, they have if you produce a plastic from these three or fossil, you get the same chemical physical properties. There is the only way you can distinguish bio-based from fossil, which is C14. You can test for C14 content, and what you will find in a grade which is already offered as ISCC-PLUS. So, for example, you have grade 1, 2, 3 from a supplier that he offers as an ISCC-PLUS bio-based. You get the non-bio-based version, you will find C14. And if you get the certified version, you also find C14 because it's in the same process and in the same plant. So someone is getting the certification, but everybody gets the physical content.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And now that you're talking about the, let's say, analysis, of course, one might think that why do I have to do all this mass balance certification and the all overall efforts? At the end, I just take my final product and I do a C14 distribution on it and look, so how much old carbon and how much new bio-based carbon is in my product. One can do that, but the boundaries of that approach is using other chemical recycled materials because they are usually fossil. Again, you have your synthetic rubber in your end-of-life tires. This is already old carbon, and even if you use that fraction and you do a C14 analysis,
it's indistinguishable.
It is indistinguishable, exactly.
Hmm.
So this really, for the biogenic or even bio-waste part, you can do C14, but only for the first run through, let's say. So if you use it for packaging, let's say, this material, and then you run it again, it gets diluted even more and even more, and this C14 distribution gets always more and more incorrect with each cycle.
Do you enjoy the podcast? Then subscribe and rate it on your platform. And join the discussion on LinkedIn. Your feedback and comments help us improve the podcast and bring relevant topics to you. Let's form a better world with plastics. Yeah, so for those listeners who are not perfectly firm in the analysis of carbon dating, so the point is you have cosmic rays that hit the atmosphere that turns nitrogen into nitrogen 14 into carbon 14. And this carbon 14 is taken up by the plants and incorporated into their carbon sources, so into their sugars, into their molecules. And this is slightly radioactive, nothing to be very worried about, but over time, C14 decays into other elements and is no longer present in fossil-based products. So if you pump out oil out of the ground, there's no C14 or no C13 in there. And in plant-based matter there is. So this is the only method to distinguish between new carbon, as you said, and old carbon. So, and then parenthesis closed. Let's move into the ISCC-PLUS certification and what this is about and what the system is about, because you're also an auditor for this and global product manager for ISCC overall at TÜV SÜD. So tell us about this and why this certification makes sense and how prevalent it is in the industry.
So ISCC as a system provider is one of the examples and the biggest, I would say, and the internationally most recognized of the systems when it comes to mass balance certification. They originated please don't get me on that number, 15 years ago. They were founded. Back in the day, for the biofuels market in the European Union, there are national quotas for biofuels, and the European Commission, they decided that there needs to be a traceability in the market, in the supply chains, that can prove at the end that a certain amount of fossil crude oil has been replaced by some sort of renewable means. And this is where ISCC pretty much grow large in biofuel certifications. And if you stumble over the wording ISCC EU, this is this EU system for biofuels, biomass fuels, and as of this year also for e-fuels. But that's just a side notice. For the chemical industry, ISCC decided to do a spin-off for a completely voluntary market, so no one is forced to participate in that market, and it's just really demand-based or demand-driven that companies want to use the same approach that is known from biofuels and also claim the sustainable attribute for base chemicals, special chemicals, and of course polymers, plastic. And the approach of the system is really the same, and ISCC generated a whole landscape over the certification where it is fairly easy, if you have seen one system document, to also transfer this to others and have a really harmonized approach to do the auditing, to do the certifications. And there is, of course, a special wording behind that. You already mentioned bio-based, which is one of their material categories, biocircular, which is biogenic, but with a waste residue status, or circular. So a lot of the wording ISCC generated is now fairly well used for all of mass balance certification, let's say. And they are really the leader. A lot of other certifications that are on the market, they follow the lead. ISCC has a static growth of, let's say, in the first 3 to 4 years, they doubled certification numbers each year. For the last 2 years now, it is a growth of around 1,200, 1,500 new certificates each year. And here we're talking about net growth, meaning, of course, there are companies that are not longer in the system and step out, but they're, of course, not longer. They do not hold valid certificates anymore. So just the overall number of new certifications minus the ones that step out. Here we're talking about around 1,500 each year that come to the marketplace, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, what we also see is we did the market report on medical grade plastics, and we also looked at sustainability, and ISCC-PLUS was one of the certifications we looked at. 2/3 of the medical grade plastics producers are at least certified at one site. So it's like 40 out of 60 producers have at least one site certified under ISCC-PLUS. So if I'm a producer of medical equipment, medical devices, laboratory equipment, and I want to use sustainable ISCC-PLUS certified materials. What do I have to do? Walk us through a procedure, a certification procedure.
So first of all, of course, you need to in-house discuss this topic and get it approved, because it is not something that comes overnight. So to give some numbers, most of our clients, they take 3 to 6 months to implement the certification system. Mm-hmm. If they're completely new, of course. So from blank to having their certificate, that's the time frame we're talking about. For internal efforts, we are around 3 to 4 weeks full-time equivalent to set up the system. Again, if you have someone that is experienced in the company and has never heard of mass balance certification before. So those are the time frames we are talking about. So coming and saying, okay, yes, when do you have your next available audit slot? Okay, in 2 weeks. Yeah, of course we can do it in 2 weeks. I do not think that this approach will work for any company. What is the typical certification process? So first, you need to identify a approved certification body that is registered with ISCC. On the ISCC webpage, iscc-system.org, there is a list of all the approved certification bodies, including which ISCC system, like ISCC EU, ISCC-PLUS, so on, they are approved for. And then you get in contact with that certification body. You will get a whole new set of information from them. They will, of course, most likely are willing to answer the questions that might arise internally. And then you have a contracting phase, of course, with the certification body. And after you have valid contract, you can register with ISCC. This process, again, is fairly detailed, explained on the website. There is a form that you can apply where you have to state which certification body you have a contract with. Then in the background, there is an approval process going on. And then you have identified certification body and certification system. And then it is up to the company to install, we always refer to it as an ISCC management system. So for most of the listeners that come from the medical field, I don't think talking about management systems is something very new to you. But so you might already have an integrated management system with all your certifications, and ISCC or ISCC-PLUS system will be a part of it. It needs to be integrated. There are certain, let's say, key points or key processes that are impacted by getting this ISCC certification. Your strategic and technical procurement, your logistics to some extent, and also your production, your sales and marketing. For all of those things, you might already have a processes in place, of course. Those need to be, let's say, a little extended on the requirements that come from ISCC. And at the end, you end up preferably with a handbook similar to your quality management handbook or other handbooks you have, with a whole summary of your ISCC management system, with references to all the already existing processes. So you have your network in your IMS, integrated ISCC, and if that is in place, usually there is some sort of pre-auditing to check with the certification company if everything is in place, if all of the requirements have been met. And then you go with your with the regular certification audit, which is mandatory on site. And then you have your regular certification process. You get a report, maybe something a little bit more special with those ISCC or other mass balance certifications. You only have a very limited amount of time to implement non-conformity. So for ISCC, it is 40 days. That can be between the on-site audit and the implementation of all measures coming from non-conformities. Between audit and issuance of the certificate, there is a maximum of 60 days with ISCC. And after you have implemented all the measures, the certification company you decided on issued the certificate. The certificate is valid for 365 days, 1 year. There is a mandatory full audit every year, meaning after some 11 months, you set the date for a new recertification audit with the certification company, and that's the cycle that is repeatedly done and needs to be conducted. Whereas in the initial certification, really the focus, so the initial certification is pretty much your entry pass for this marketplace, for the ISCC marketplace and the ISCC supply chains. So here in the audit, the focus is really on the management systems. Do you have everything in place that enables you to be a good, compliant participant in the system? And then after the first year, in which you have done independent transactions. So here you just need to follow the rules set in your management system for ISCC. After 1 year, a sample of those transactions you have conducted in the past, they're checked again to see if you understood all the rules and you work in accordance to the regulations. There are some parts in the management system that are recurring. So there is a mandatory training of the employees in the first year. There is an internal assessment that needs to be conducted independently of the third-party audit. But really in the recertification, the focus lies on ex post, what were the transactions in the past certification period, and those. And here we are again, what I meant with the disadvantages. Here is really where the transaction will be looked at with a magnifying glass.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to summarize, first of all, you need to start a project. You need to have a concept of how to implement this. So, okay, let's make a quick advertisement break. So, I do consulting for ISCC Plus certification. So, if you want to implement ISCC Plus in your company, give me a call and let's chat. So, you need to do a concept, and then you need to explain to management and to everybody involved, what are we going to do? How long is this going to take? So you mentioned 3 to 6 months in and 4 work weeks full time. I mean, could be because of my, let's say, industry, because medical tends to do things more complicated than they should actually be. But in my experience, it was like more 6 to 9 months. Uh, Also due to like slower processes and other let's say priorities, and you tend to involve a lot of people depending on how you want to implement the system. So you can do mass balance on an Excel sheet. The system allows for it. However, you can also set up your own automated IT systems, which I recommend because it's much more livable and much less, let's say, error prone, and therefore I tend to recommend more towards like 7 8 months to do the project. However, this is semantics, depends all on the let's say also the size of the company. If you have a multinational corporation and you need to like cover the complicated setups, this makes it a little more difficult to set it up. If you have a small and medium company, you have 2 injection molding machines, you're going to be golden with the 3 months. So this to that as a comment. Then you get your certification body, get a contract in place, register with ISCC Plus, and plan your audits. And then you say, this is the pre-audit, and usually 1 to 2 months before the real audit, so you have time to implement the findings from the pre-audit. And then you move on and have your full audit, where you have the initial management systems checked. Then these management systems get looked at. Can you be compliant with this? And then you get some findings. Some are major and some are minor. And the major ones you need to correct in, what did he say, 60 days after the audit, you need to correct the major ones. And then the
40.
minor ones are like, yeah, you should look at that, but it's not that bad. You can do it next year. So is that no longer the case?
No, unfortunately, this is not longer the case. As of beginning of this year, they changed the whole definitions in a dark room in the basement and did not tell anyone about it.
Okay.
So for both minor and major nonconformities, you only have 40 days to implement them now.
Mm-hmm.
The huge difference between a major and a minor nowadays is just on, let's say, the consequences during recertifications.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a recertification with an identified major nonconformity, your certificate is immediately suspended for 40 days maximum,
Mm-hmm.
or until you have implemented the measures.
Mm-hmm.
For a minor, you do not have this suspension. It is the measures have to be implemented within 40 days.
Mm-hmm.
The topics you can take to the next year are merely so-called recommendations. In ISO, I think they're called OFIs. So those you can take for the next year. And if you don't want to do it the next year, they will just keep in your audit report until you have implemented it. So those have pretty much no consequence, but really all nonconformities need to be closed within 40 days.
Okay. So thanks for the update. So I didn't know that. So this is the ISCC Plus certification. After you corrected all the nonconformities from your first audit, now congratulations, you get your certificate, and now you can produce with ISCC Plus certified materials. Until, of course, the next year the auditor comes back and does the recertification audit. then you might have some deviations you need to correct within 40 days, and so this keeps you on the system. If someone would cheat on the system and have major nonconformities, not resolve them, or would intentionally, let's say, cheat, then you get on the blacklist. Could you elaborate on that, just as a last point?
Sure. So again, there can be accidents, of course. There can be even systematic errors when you do the balancing. But here you need to distinguish between, let's say, a systematic error, something in the mass balance is just not right, which would be even a major nonconformity, and intentional fraud, greenwashing, as it's called, let's say, in the public, meaning intentionally double counting materials, using them for different certification systems, even multiple accounting, what it's called, and just increasing your profit by making regular material, just putting a sustainable attribute on it intentionally. And this would be a so-called critical nonconformity if this is identified, and this means immediate suspension of the certificate and withdraw even, and then you have to face very serious consequences, meaning that you can be excluded from the system for up to 7 years. But those things, they're really up to ISCC to decide, so we just have to report it. And unfortunately, this has been the case in the past quite frequently, I would say.
Yeah, they put you up on a website.
They put you up on a website. Everyone can read your company's name as with the, let's say, asterisks under it, fraudulent behavior. This is nothing you really want.
Yeah.
So again, there are serious consequences, and that's also the reason. And this together with the annual audit, someone external really looking over your sustainable books and bookings, that prohibits what might has been in the past, let's say, little error or something like that. So now, if you decide to go for such a system, there is a lot of commitment asked, also from your management. That's also part of the system that needs to be set up. So people are really stepping back on seeing that as just, let's say, minor offense to do such intentional wrong bookings, and just putting out a claim, yes, my product is sustainable, even though they have no proof for it. So the rules of the systems, there are quite a lot. So there is a huge library of system documents with ISCC. Some relevant for some industries, other might not be applicable. So ISCC really has a thumb over the system. It is their reputation, and it's their intention not to jeopardize the position they have in the market.
Yeah. I mean, on top of that, I mean, if you have some repercussions, and if you have that, like, a third party looking at everything with a strict eye, this also gives the thing a credibility, because you do not want a certification that has the credibility of, yeah, but everybody gets it, and it's not really difficult, and you do not have really to do anything to get this stamp on your product. Then it's not really worth attaining. So that would be my point. But I would say let's come to a close. As a last question, what advice would you want to give to our listeners in the area of mass balance certifications?
Yes. So do not be afraid, just by the, let's say, just because the system is so new and it has not been known in your company, maybe. It is nothing you want to refrain from. So there is a lot of opportunity on the market. That's what we see. That's what we see just by the sheer size of the certifications, and we are really this whole system goes in a direction of an FSC PFC certification, which is like those standards that are used for all paper pulp products or forestry-based products, and it is internationally recognized. So if really you're looking for a system that is recognized in all the markets, ISCC is definitely the way to go. And if you, of course, decide to go for more sustainable products, this whole mass balance approach will be the chain of custody option that most companies will go for. And there are great companies out there doing the certifications, but also doing, of course, the consultancy that will have an open ear for you, answering all of your questions. And we know the trend also goes towards emission reduction, product carbon footprint, corporate carbon footprint. But just because your off-takers might ask for an emission reduction, also giving them the opportunity to giving them a product with a different carbon as a content, with a replaced carbon in the product, might be a solution to go. And in the future, and here's maybe a little spoiler, ISCC also decided to have a combined approach for doing ISCC-PLUS certification, meaning replacing the inner carbon in the product with a more sustainable one, but also getting a certified product carbon footprint, meaning you can claim an emission reduction for your whole supply chain, for your processing, and those kind of things. So at the end, we want to try to reduce, of course, carbon emissions, but also reduce the amount of new fossil crude that is used for our products. And with the ISCC-PLUS approach, you can whip two flies with one stroke. I don't know if that's a saying, but yeah, definitely that would be my last words. And if you have any questions, Lucas, we always have an open ear.
Okay, thank you very much. That was Stefan Rössler from TÜV SÜD, and until the next time, I'd say. Still looking for more in regards to plastics and medical technology? Visit our website www.gradical.ch and inform yourself on the services of Gradical. You can also check out our market report on medical grade plastics on www.medicalgradeplastics.de. Or you attend a training regarding material compliance at CATS or at ISCC-PLUS. And of course, don't forget to rate and subscribe our podcast wherever you get your podcast. Let's form a better world with plastics.